are now tuned into the Misi Muse Unplugged, a pop-up podcast variety show helping consultants along their journey to greatness with your host, management consultant, author and blogger, Christy Lindor.
Hey, my go-getters. Welcome to the Misi Muse Unplugged podcast show. For episode 25, we will be doing a segment that I call AMA, Ask Me Anything. And if this is your first time tuning in, AMAs are when I have the utmost pleasure of connecting with a seasoned or a former consultant, and they share their career journey and give you advice. Today's guest, we have Michelle Florendo. A little bit about Michelle. She's a former consultant engineer and now a career coach for Type A professionals. And in our conversation, she really discusses her career journey and helps break down components of strategic decision-making techniques that you can actually apply immediately in your life. You can also check out my website after today's conversation. Go to misimuse.com for tools, links, and videos from the show notes where Michelle provides some really actionable information to really help you along your journey to greatness. One other announcement for today. In December, we'll actually make Misi Muse Unplugged podcast show 5 months old. And in true consulting fashion, we're actually going to be launching a 6-week study, gathering feedback from our listeners. So we'll be launching a survey, and I'll talk about it in a couple weeks. And we really want to use the insights that you provide us as we curate and plan out our 2018 calendar. We want to get your thoughts. Let us know, what you like, what you dislike, what type of guests you want to see more of, less of. Love to make sure that, we continue to meet your need. And we thank you so much for all of your support. We've gotten such a great outpouring of support, and that I think that's really kept this pop-up podcast going. In the meantime, if you've got advice or any feedback, feel free to drop us a line, misimuseunplugged@gmail.com. Stay tuned for next week, episode 26. We're actually going to have another AMA with this individual. They actually are a consultant, and they use the consulting profession in a very unique way. This individual has been an independent consultant. They've gone to boutique firms. They've done entrepreneurial ventures, gone back into consulting, and really leveraged the profession in ways as they kind of mirror kind of the demands of the market. Really super cool conversation. So you can check that out next week. Also, I'm excited. Next week, we're going to have some book announcements. Stay tuned for a little bit more about what's happening with my book and how you can get plugged in. So with that, let's get started. So Michelle, thank you so much for joining us on the Misi Muse Unplugged today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited about our conversation today. Before we get started, maybe if you can take a moment to introduce yourself to the go-getters of the Misi Muse Unplugged.
Yeah. So it's funny. I feel like with all of the different things that I've done, the way that I boil things down are that I'm essentially an engineer by trade. That's where I started, but also a Type A management consultant, former brand marketer turned career coach for high achieving professionals.
I love that. So it's just such a nice mashup, Michelle. So you engineer, consultant, and then with the coach. Maybe if you can take a step back and share with us, how did you decide to go into consulting? And you can share with us, that'd be great.
It's so funny because looking back, I had no idea what consulting was when I started college. And I feel like that can sometimes be a common thing because to this day, my dad does not understand what I did when I was a consultant. But originally I was really good at math and science. And so going into school, I went to Stanford. I really knew that I wanted to be an engineer. I wanted to be able to use my analytical skills to be able to solve problems. Engineering seemed to be the way to do it. Settled on basically industrial engineering with a specialization in decision engineering, which we'll probably get to later on in this call. But over the course of my undergraduate career, I found myself interacting with a lot of different students who are interested also in problem solving, but more on the business side of things. And so they were talking about management consulting. And again, I went into school having no idea what that was. So I'd ask, well, what's that? And the way that it was explained to me was that consultants essentially get to go around and help companies and other organizations solve their problems. I thought, wow, well, that sounds awesome. I love solving problems. I would love to help solve problems for other people as well. And so, when I was going through recruiting, I looked at a lot of different consulting companies, found one where the people were just a really great fit and decided to start my career there. And, even though I eventually left the world of consulting, it was such a wonderful place to learn and really like get great exposure to a number of different things. If I had to do it all over again, I still would.
So you mentioned when you were in consulting and all of the great experiences you have, maybe if you could share a story of, what was your aha moment when you decided that it was time to make a different decision. Maybe share a little bit with us, like the crossroads you were at, and like how did you make the leap from consulting into coaching?
Well, I'll definitely talk about how I made the leap from consulting, and then I did a number of different things before I ended up in coaching. But like I said, consulting was a really great place for me to start and just learn the ropes of being able to interact with clients, work on a team, solve ambiguous problems. But over the course of my time, I was working at essentially a boutique consulting firm. I found myself not not seeing a future for myself at the firm, because while I continued to learn, the things that I was learning was not necessarily the direction in which I wanted to grow. And I just remember being on a particular project, and it was incredibly stressful. The client was just really, really demanding, and I just hit a point where it's like, you know what? This is not where I want to stay for the next 5 years. But at the same time, I felt so lost because I hadn't actually done the thinking around, well, what is it that I would do instead? Like, what is it that I actually want to do? I just knew that, what I was doing at the moment wasn't it. And because I didn't have a clear vision of what I wanted to do next, I felt really stuck. And stayed that way for a bit of time until I was talking to mentors, talking to fellow alums, and one of my mentors said, "Okay, wait a minute, Michelle. So let me get this straight. You studied decision engineering and you use this skill set to help companies make the best decisions for them. Why not use that same skill set to make the best decision for yourself?" And I thought, why didn't I think of that? But I think it speaks to, the fact that it's so valuable to have mentors sometimes, just people on the outside to point out what may have been right under your nose the entire time. And so with that advice, I, leaned back on my training and decision analysis and really thought through, okay, well, what is it that I want? And, what were the decisions that had me arrive at this place? What were the, factors of those decisions that didn't work for me anymore? How did I want to change, and what options existed out there that could be a better fit?
That was such a great story. I think we've all gotten to that kind of that stuck moment, within our lives, and I know I've had a couple moments like that. So I think it was great that you had such an amazing mentor to really help you kind of see that, because the answer is sometimes right in front of us.
But sometimes
So,
it's just hard to see when we're
yeah.
just like up to our ears in something else.
Yeah. And as I heard your story, Michelle, it reminded me of a quote. I was checking out your website, and Go Getters, I'll definitely put a link to Michelle's website. But I came across a quote you said in a video that I actually think I'm going to put on I'm going to print it out on and frame it and put it in my office, because I think it's such an important and grounded quote. So you mentioned in the video, and I don't know if you remember when you said this, but you said, what we were taught is to be successful, but not to be happy. And I think that's such a powerful quote. And I think it's so important for people to think about that sometimes, especially in careers that are as demanding as consulting. So maybe if you can share a little bit of context of that quote and kind of, where you were coming from in that space.
Yeah. So a little bit about my background. I'm the daughter of immigrants. I think you can relate to this too. And so, at least the story that I grew up with, and this is going to be my best impression of my dad, was the key to success is to study hard, do well in school, go to college, get a good job. The
Mhm.
end. And I don't know if that story or that formula resonates with you, but that's what was kind of drilled into my mind growing up. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to do that. I'm going to study hard. I'm going to do well in school. I'm going to go to the best college I can go to, and then I'm going to go and get that quote unquote good job. And what I realized was, that wasn't it. There was still more to the so-called formula, especially since, that formula, at least it worked for me in order to get to a place where I was successful, but that didn't necessarily mean that I was happy. And I think sometimes we conflate the two. And it's something that I see a lot in the clients that I work with in my private practice where, they're high achieving, like I said, type A professionals. They know what are the things they need to do in order to succeed. They've like had their plan. They plan who knows how many steps in advance. They executed against the plan, and they're there and they've made it, and yet something doesn't feel right, or it doesn't feel fulfilling. Or maybe it did in the beginning, but over time they realize something is missing. And I think that that's a trap that high achievers can really fall into sometimes, especially because we're so used to being able to execute so well against, this plan of action, this pre-carved out path, that we forget that, there's this other component to life, and that's doing the work and doing the self-reflection to really understand, okay, outside of what we've been told is success, what does success actually look like for us,
Right.
for me? What does that mean? And how does that either align or differ from these pre carved out paths that we've been made aware of?
Today's episode is brought to you on behalf of the Misi Muse, 100 plus selected practices, unwritten rules and habits of great consultants, a book by Christy Lindor. Written in the voice of a mentor, the Misi Muse provides insights on the unwritten rules of great consultants, a perfect read for new or aspiring consultants. Christy dives into her 15 plus years of consulting experience while sharing interviews and anecdotes from over 50 consulting partners and leaders that represents thought leadership from 80% of the top 10 consulting firms in the world. Pre-sale begins shortly. Sign up at www.misimuse.com.
It's so true. And I mean, you said that story, and I was watching your video, and I felt like you were talking to me. I really did, because I was like, oh my gosh, I was thinking in my mind, I was like, Michelle's dad and family must know minds. They must be reading the same playbook, because I heard the same things growing up. And I actually ended up going to business school because that was the thing my mom told me that I should do, in order to be successful. I had three choices, three career paths. They either become a doctor, a lawyer,
Right.
or, and actually no, four, an engineer or an entrepreneur. And I was like, well, I don't like blood. I was like, I didn't know if I was like, yeah, I was like, I didn't know if I wanted to really be a lawyer. I'm like, I'm not really that great of an engineer. I don't see myself doing that. So I was like, well, okay, I'm going to become a business person. And that's kind of how I made my decision. So, and it's funny how that decision is what kind of led me down this path. And same, I didn't know what consulting was either. So we just have, it's just fascinating, I find. And I don't know if it's kind of the first generation experience, Michelle, or if it's others. So I'm curious if others kind of have the same mentality. Well, you speak to a lot of different, professionals. What's your thoughts? Is this an immigrant, experience, or?
Well, I mean, I do think that that whole study hard, go to school, get a job formula is resonates with a lot of children of immigrants. But I do think that people who may not even have had parents who are immigrants or people who are not first generation, if they're in that high achiever set, there still is this common feeling of, oh, like if this then that. If I do this, then I will be successful. If I get this, then I will be happy. And what I guess where things don't work out is when that formula doesn't actually turn out to be true. And then people feel lost. Like, wait a minute, I did all of the things. I did everything in the list. Why am I not happy? And what's so interesting, and I think I talk about this in an article that's on my LinkedIn, what's so interesting to me is that sometimes I'll see like type A high achievers in this place where they feel stuck, they feel unhappy, but they won't say anything. They won't
Mm,
reach out. They won't ask for help because there's this level of almost shame around, wait, I did all the things. Why am I not happy? Like, I have this great job. I have this great salary. Like, all these people would love to be where I'm at. I should be happy. And then there's almost like this spiral of, well, I should be happy, but I'm not. Oh, why am I not happy? And then sometimes it kind of just devolves from there. And so it's been really interesting to see that in people and see just the shift that can be made even when they just make that first decision around, you know what, I don't want to be unhappy anymore and I want to do something about it.
right, right. And I'm glad you mentioned decision because it's a nice segue to kind of my next question. And since you did study decision analysis, and I know that's probably a lot, the framework of a lot of the work you do, I think it'd be great if we can, maybe talk about that for a second. And I would love, for you to, Michelle, share with the go-getters, like what are, if we take the idea of decisions, right, and we
Mhm.
kind of unpack that, maybe you can share, some thoughts on ways that people can make more meaningful decisions, if they are stuck or they're trying to solve a specific problem. Share with us like some of your best practices.
Yeah, happy to, because one of the things that I've realized recently is that my mission in life is to empower people to be happier through the application of better decision making. And when I think about it, it's kind of funny because when I tell people what I studied in school and essentially what I've been studying for the past 15 years, so studying decision engineering at Stanford and then studying how that can be applied to personal decision making, I get a lot of people coming up to me, oh my gosh, I hate decisions. I hate making decisions. It stresses me out. Can you tell me how to do this better? And I would love to get to a place where people can see that decision making doesn't have to be this stressful experience. It can actually be really empowering. Like I said, if you find yourself in a place where things aren't working out, one of the most empowering things you can do is decide to do something different or decide to take action. And so it makes me, think about like, why is it that decisions feel so stressful or get people tied up in knots? And one of the things that I noticed was, so there's this fallacy out there, and I feel like if people were to recognize this other fundamental truth of decision analysis and decision engineering, it would free them from a lot of stress. And so this principle is basically the fact that the quality of your decision is separate and distinct from the quality of the outcome. And so if you think about it, a lot of people get stressed out because they get caught up around, what if I make the wrong decision?
Right.
And I'll probe people about that. Okay, well, what makes a decision wrong? And they might say, well, what if I I make a decision to do this thing, and it turns out that something bad happens, and then I'll say, okay, well, did you know that bad thing was going to happen when you had that decision? He said, well, no, because it was unexpected. Like, all right, well, you made the best decision you could with the information you had. And I think sometimes that lands with people. The way that I like to explain it even further is, you know, decisions are about the things you can control, right? Uncertainties are the things that you cannot control. And you can't beat yourself up about the uncertainties that you can't control. So a classic example of this is, if you think about the weather, we get weather reports, and I still find it fascinating that in this day and age, we can't fully predict the weather. But, let's say that you wanted to go to the beach this weekend, and, the weather reports say that, there's only a 15% chance of rain. And so I would ask someone, okay, given a 15% chance of rain, would you choose to go to the beach if that's how you want to spend your weekend? And they may say, yes. All right, so let's fast forward. Let's say you go to the beach and then it rains. Now, was that necessarily a bad decision? And I think most people would say no, right? It wasn't your fault that it rained. And, by all measure of the information you had at your hands, you didn't think it was going to rain. It was only 15% chance.
Right.
And so I think if people realize and just internalize the fact that their decisions and the quality of their decision, whether it's good or bad, is separate from the quality of the outcome, it'll free them from a lot of stress because they'll recognize that you can only worry about making the best decision you can, and all of the uncertainties that are outside of your control, you've got to let go of. But the good news is that, once you're at the beach, and if it's raining, you have a chance to make a new decision, right? You can empower yourself to choose to, go into, a restaurant and get out of the rain.
Right. I'm sure people listening to this episode they're gonna probably be freed from the chains of not acting sometimes. I think, that not only like, okay, can I make a bad decision, but I think, sometimes people don't make decisions kind of for fear of missing out on the unknown, and I think what you just said was just so spot on. And I can just hear chains breaking literally, like people rethinking that. So I think that was really powerful, Michelle. So thank you for sharing that. What advice would you give any consultants or, aspiring consultants out there that may be at a crossroads? They're trying to, like you were saying, make the right decision. And, I love how you talked about how you figured out, when you were in consulting at some point, it was not for you. And to your point, there's probably a lot of people out there that either consulting is for them and they're scared to make the wrong decision, or they realize they're in consulting and it's not for them and they're scared again to make the wrong decision. Like, what advice would you give both parties?
Yeah. Well, so as I mentioned before, you got to focus on what are the things that you can control. And that's, being thoughtful about the decision in front of you. And, one of the insights that I'd love to share with those of you listening is that every decision has three components. And if you think through each of those three components, you can be pretty confident that you've taken the time to be able to make a good decision. And so those three components, gosh, I feel like I'm going into consulting speak. So the first of those three components is really understanding what are your objectives. Your objectives are, what is it that you want? And to what you had said earlier about that quote that you pulled from my video, it's not about, what is it that you want to make yourself successful, or what is it that society wants for you in order for you to be successful. It's what do you want in order to be happy? And sometimes it takes, some separation and some sifting through things to understand, what is it that's core to you that'll make you happy, and what is it that's coming from the outside. So that's the first piece of any decision, understanding what are your objectives. The second piece is really getting an understanding of what your various options are. And I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is, they'll look first to the most obvious options. Like maybe it's, oh, I need to either stay in this job or I need to go to business school. Whereas there's likely other options out there, especially beyond the most obvious ones, if you put the time into exploring those. And it does take time, it does take effort, but I've found that it pays off because there are often other options out there that may be better suited to getting your objectives than necessarily the most obvious ones. So the first piece to think through, what are your objectives that are unique to you? Second piece is, what are your options really, and the ones even beyond the obvious ones. And then the third piece is, thinking through what information do you have on how these various options may deliver on your objectives. And the key piece here is not to try to gather every single piece of information you possibly can, because, in this world, you won't get perfect information. I mean, if you're already working in consulting, you probably already know it's impossible to get perfect data, right? If you've ever tried to get that from a client. And so in examining the information that you have, it's really about not how much information can you possibly get and can you boil the ocean, but instead, what is enough information, and specifically which information matters in terms of how these various options deliver on your objectives. And so if you take the time to, really examine and be thoughtful about each of those three components of any decision, your objectives, your options, the information, and how much information you need to move forward, then you can get to a place where you can be confident about the decision you want to make going forward. Now, I know we only have limited time in this conversation, and I could talk about decision making for days. And so if anyone out there would love a tool to be able to help them think through those various pieces of, what you may be facing at a crossroads in your career, I do have a really great tool on my website. It's called the Quick Start Guide to Figuring Out What's Next. And it's essentially 28 pages of exercises that'll lead you through some of that self-reflection to help you sift through what may be really relevant in the decision you're facing.
Well, this is awesome. And go-getters, I will definitely put a direct link to the Quick Start Guide. I love the 3-part framework for decision making. That's so pithy and actionable. So thank you for sharing that with us. Maybe you can give us, if people are interested in reaching out to you and connecting with you, Michelle, what are some ways folks can contact you?
Yeah, so if you'd love to talk more or get in touch with me, I have a contact form on my website, so you can get a hold of me there. Or you're also welcome to email me at michelle@whatifyoucould.be.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for all these. I mean, it's funny. This is an AMA, kind of like a virtual fireside chat, and you've given so much really actionable techniques and practices. So it's just actually really, really cool. Any last thoughts or remarks you want to share with the go-getters?
Yeah, I think the last thing that I would leave you with is, again, decision making doesn't have to be a stressful thing. It can be an empowering thing. And you always have an opportunity to make a decision. Even if you're in a situation where you feel like nothing is in your control, you can still decide how you want to frame how you're seeing the situation and how you want to feel. And I think that's an incredibly powerful thing.
Well, thank you so much for that, Michelle. I thank you so much for being on today's show. This is great. Would love to have you in the future if you're available.
Absolutely. Again, when I first found out about your podcast, I was so excited because I thought, finally, a podcast just for consultants. I love it because as soon as I saw Misi, she must be a consultant. We gotta talk.
Oh yeah. And it's so funny that as I hear everything you're saying, I'm like, oh my goodness. I can see this being a very popular episode because you've just given so many gems. So I would love to have you again on the show. So thank you. And thank you, my go-getters, for tuning in today. This is Christy Lindor signing out for the Misi Muse Unplugged Pop-Up Podcast. Here's to your journey to greatness.
Tune in every Friday for new episodes syndicated on iTunes, Google Play Music, and many more. Visit www.misimuse.com for more information.